Bible worm, reading the Bible, Bible worm. Hello and welcome to this special Easter episode of Bible Worm. Sometimes the stuff that shoots out of our butts is pure silk. I'm Dr. Robert Williamson, Associate Professor of Religious Studies at Hendrix College and pastor of Mercy Community Church in Little Rock, Arkansas. I'm joined this and every week by my friend and colleague, Dr. Amy Robertson, biblical scholar and executive director of Congregation Beit Haverim, a synagogue in Atlanta. We're here every week to discuss the biblical text, both as scholars and as people of faith, one Jewish and one Christian. This week we read the Easter story as told in Mark 16, 1-8, a story in which there is no resurrected Jesus and the women run from the tomb in fear. We talk about how the sparseness of this Easter tale resonates with the reality of lived experience, in which the evidence for faith is often hard to come by. We think about the women's experience at the tomb with its mixture of awe and fear, and wrestle with what to make of their silence. And we find that the story ultimately opens up toward us as readers and people of faith, inviting us to meet Jesus in Galilee. Will we stay or will we go? That's what we really want to know. Thanks for joining us. Hey, Amy, how are you?
Oh, Bobby, I'm all right. How are you?
I'm good. It's only been a couple of days since we've seen each other.
That is true, but each day feels like eternity.
It does. And just at a very short time ago, my only Zoom meeting that I ever had was once a week with you.
Mm-hmm.
And now yours like my fifth one today. So this is a very special Zoom meeting. This is our Easter Bible Worm Zoom meeting.
It's our Easter Bible Worm Zoom meeting.
Yeah.
First annual.
Hopefully the first of many to come. All right, so today's Easter, this is the shortest Easter story of all the gospel Easter stories. It's only 8 verses long. There is no resurrected Jesus that we actually see in this text.
Yeah, we don't meet him.
And so it's a short and kind of sparse text.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot to do with it, maybe, and in a sparse time in which we're reading it. It might be exactly the Easter text that we need.
Yeah, well said.
So, chapter 16, we're reading chapter 16, verses 1-8, so we'll start with 1-4. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they could go and anoint Jesus' dead body. Very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they came to the tomb. They were saying to each other, "Who's going to roll the stone away from the entrance for us?" When they looked up, they saw that the stone had been rolled away, and it was a very large stone. Okay, so this is the part of the story that takes place before they actually encounter the tomb. And so we've got these 3 women going to anoint Jesus' body. Mm-hmm. Thoughts about their role, what they're doing there?
So Jesus is buried in a stone tomb, which is usually like a burial for a wealthier person, right? Yeah. Poor folks were buried in the ground. And there were and are rituals in the Jewish community and in many communities that accompany death and sort of care for the body after death to sort of honor it and show respect for it. In the modern day, the group who performs these kind of rituals is called a Hevra Kadisha, which means it has like sacred friends, I guess. Mm. And the idea is that within each community, there is a Hevra Kadisha who cares for and honors the body after death. And no one knows who they are. You're not allowed to know who the people are who will care for you in your death. And so that makes it like the greatest mitzvah that you are doing something that you can never be repaid for and no one knows that you've done it.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And so now what it looks like is a certain ritual bathing of the body, making sure the body's not alone between death and burial time and that kind of thing. And here what we see is anointing, right? Which we talked about anointing earlier, right? When the other woman was putting nard, right? Pouring nard over him. And so it's another ritual that accompanies death and is sort of a way of honoring the body that once held life. And so that's what I see the women here doing.
I really love that interpretation. one imagines that the normal practice would have been at the time of burial, people would have put spices on the body. But because of the circumstances, so it was Friday afternoon, Sabbath was approaching. There was a lot of, Jesus had just been executed for sedition against the state. There was a lot of danger, one suspects. So Jesus's body presumably was not anointed on Friday. And so it's been there since on the third day now. And so they're coming, I think, at some risk to themselves, going to the tomb.
Yeah, it's like they're like sneaking in.
Right.
Yeah.
To care for the body that has already been dead. So this is an act of fidelity and loyalty and kind of a tender care for Jesus. In my mind, stands a little bit in contrast to the disciples who ran away from Jesus, Peter and the others. He had one disciple betray him, Judas, one deny him, Peter, and then the others ran away. And here, the first people we see are the women coming to the tomb for this kind of very personal,
very intimate.
act.
Yeah. I love the detail in here that as they're walking up, they're thinking about what they're going to do about this stone.
Yeah.
That is another detail that to me just makes it feel so like grounded and practical. And they're not like, can you imagine the disciples? They'd be like racing to see who could get there first. They'd be like, like, I'm going to do it. No, I'm going to do it, and there's none of that. There's no posturing. Like they're very just sort of practical about it. Like, okay, we're going to have to figure out how to physically navigate this situation. And they just have this like practical determination about it.
They're doing it just after sunrise. And so it's kind of the first moment that it was practical to do it. They could not have done it before sunset the previous day because it was still Sabbath. And then they can't do it in the middle of the night, obviously. And so they've gotten up kind of the first moment that they had, they've gone to do it. And they haven't, one could have thought through like, hey, we should take some, a bodybuilder with us. What's that thing called that you not Orange Theory, but all the people do with the
CrossFit?
A
CrossFitter. Yeah.
They could have found a CrossFit instructor to go with them or something like that. Yeah. Like I pick up rocks and move them.
They probably do that in CrossFit.
I bet they do. They do.
Boulder lifting.
Yeah. If the tomb had been closed with like a tractor tire, the CrossFitter would have been all over that. Yeah, but so they haven't thought all the way through what they're going to do. One just gets the sense that they feel like some urgency about paying respect to the body. And the fact that they expect the tomb to be closed, to me, suggests, I assume that they've heard these stories Jesus has told about being resurrected on the third day, but they don't seem to be they're not going to the tomb anticipating that he's not going to be there or that the stone's already going to be rolled away. Like they're anticipating that Jesus is dead in the tomb. His body needs attention. The stone is there.
Well, and I do wonder, I'm trying to think if the text told us explicitly, if they would have heard this expectation that Jesus was going to rise on the third day or not. I don't know.
Because, the only thing we really get about women followers of Jesus was that text that we read at the very end of our special episode last time, where Mark tells us in 41, when Jesus was in Galilee, these women had followed and supported him, along with many other women who had come to Jerusalem with him. So that's the only mention we get. Like, oh yeah, by the way, women were around. But we don't really know. I mean, you're right. Like, Jesus was some of these... usually when he made those interpretations, he was talking to some kind of inner group. Right, to his 12, right? Like his disciples, and he sort of pulled them away from the bigger group. So I don't know what they would have known. I'd never thought of it that way. Like, I just assumed kind of they're part of the community. They've probably heard the story. But it really, to me, it opens some things up in an interesting way. If they have no reason to expect that Jesus would have been resurrected, just because they'd never heard that story. So they encounter it as, like, the first thing they've heard about it is when they encounter this guy that we're getting ready to read about. That guy. Yeah. Mark gives us a little aside in verse 4. The women have said, "Who's going to roll away the stone for us?" And then Mark tells us when they looked up, they saw the stone had been rolled away. And then he gives us this parenthetical, and it was a very large stone. Like, he really wants us to be impressed that the stone has moved. Although, in the story, the section that we didn't read, that was just right between the last episode and this one, that guy Joseph rolls the stone himself. So, it was a big stone, but that to me didn't stand out as like, no one could have done that. That's interesting. So the kind of like the first sign they get with the stone being rolled away really isn't like all that it really signifies is that someone has been messing with the tomb. The connection that I was making about the stone rolling away was the opening up of the place where Jesus was to the larger world, which would fit into this pattern of at the baptism, the skies open up and that like heaven is open to the earth for a moment. And then at the crucifixion, the curtain tears. And so the Holy of Holies is opened up to the world. Here, the tomb where Jesus has been buried is opened up to the world. And so I was sort of reading those three together, heaven, curtain, tomb. Mm-hmm. So maybe it lends itself to kind of both of those kind of interpretations.
I mean, I think it does. I keep thinking of your teaching from maybe just a couple of days ago that Mark never makes it super, like it's never quite a straight line. He never makes it a sure thing. You know, like he gestures towards all kinds of things. But you have to be willing to take the last steps yourself. And if you won't, then you won't.
I like that a lot. And so the stone is open to a very plain sense interpretation of somebody rolled away the stone. And it's also open to a miraculous intervention interpretation that the tomb has been opened up by divine intervention. And it's left to the reader, to the hearer of the story, to sort of decide, like, what are you going to... Yeah. Which of these stories are you going to inhabit? I like that a lot. I really like that. So it might be worth just noting that these three women, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome, these are the same three women who are mentioned back in chapter 15, verse 40, as the three named women who are watching from afar. We know Mary Magdalene from other Gospels, but chapter 15 was the first time that Mark has mentioned Mary Magdalene. She's not really a character in this Gospel. Salome, we don't know from elsewhere. And then Mary, here called Mary the mother of James. Previously, she was called Mary the mother of
James the Younger and Joseph.
Yeah, Mary the mother of James and Joseph. And so it's possible that this is Jesus' mother. Jesus had brothers named James and Joseph. If so, then her identity is being underplayed instead of being Mary the mother of the Messiah. It's Mary the mother of the Messiah's brothers. Yeah. Or it could be another Mary that we don't know. But anyway, it's significant that it's three women, I think, who are the ones who first go to the tomb and in just a second are going to be the first who encounter this miracle. Okay, so starting in verse 5. Going into the tomb, they saw a young man in a white robe seated on the right side, and they were startled. But he said to them, "Don't be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He isn't here. Look, here's the place where they laid him. Go tell his disciples, especially Peter, that he is going ahead of you into Galilee. You will see him there just as he told you." Overcome with terror and dread, they fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. And there ends the Easter story, according to the Gospel of Mark.
That's why we call it the spooky gospel.
Yeah.
Well, I call it that.
You'd call it that.
I call it, yeah. Bobby, who is this dude in a white robe? And can we just envision for a moment that he's wearing some, like, fancy terry cloth robe and, like, sitting in a creepy manner on the bench?
Yeah.
Just for a moment. I know that.
Yeah, so he's been to the spa and he's, like, gotten out of the sauna and he's wearing his white robe.
Yeah.
I mean, in my mind, he's an angel. You know, he's in shiny white clothes and he's there precisely so that when the women come to the tomb, he can say what he says here. But from the perspective of the women who are in the story, it's just a guy sitting there in a white robe. It's not clear that this is any kind of a divine figure. And so this is another one of those instances where it can be interpreted in a very humdrum, everyday kind of way, or in this kind of miraculous, heaven-oriented way. What do you think about him?
No, I mean, I think that's exactly right. Like, you could totally envision the women going in and saying, like, someone broke into the tomb. Yeah. Right? And now there's a guy sitting in there. Yeah. Who says, like, yeah, Jesus used to be over there on that bench, but he's not here anymore because he's risen. Yeah. You could totally read it with no miracle in there at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or, you could say this is an angelic figure, the way that angels often show up in the Hebrew Bible, as it's unclear whether it's a human or an angel, at least initially.
Yeah, that's right. And, probably in my mind, so the fact that he's wearing white, that's angels tend to wear like well-bleached clothes. And then the first thing he says is, don't be afraid, don't be alarmed, which is the thing that angels say. Like, and so like to me, that's a clue to the reader who has read angelophanies before. Like when someone unrecognizable shows up and says, don't be afraid, that's probably an angel. But otherwise, it's very subtle. And the way he describes Jesus is not Jesus, the Son of God, Jesus, the Son of Man, Jesus, the Messiah, but Jesus of Nazareth who was crucified.
Yeah.
Just kind of emphasizing his
the human identity.
Human
embodied part of Jesus's existence.
I honestly had never really inhabited this possibility you raised a little bit ago, that the women have not known until now about the resurrection story. I'm really intrigued by that. And if you think about that, then here are these women, they've come to the tomb, they've brought their spices, they're ready to anoint the body. They have no idea that there's been any prediction of resurrection. And then this is kind of how they find out, right? Is this shiny dude saying, hey, he's not here, he's been resurrected.
Right.
Like their worldview about what is possible, what has happened, everything is suddenly like, can you really believe in the possibility of a resurrection? Like all of these things hitting them all at once.
Yeah, and which would lead to, I could see how that would lead to sort of being dumbfounded, which they are.
Yeah. So that last line, overcome with terror and dread. Yeah.
Yeah. And my translation is a little bit different than terror and dread. It says terror and amazement. And that made me think, back in chapter 10, it was in verse 32, we had this conversation at the time. It was talking about groups of people following Jesus. And it told us that they were amazed and those who followed were afraid. And I remember talking about whether it was the same group who was both amazed and afraid.
Yeah.
Or if some of them were amazed and some of them were afraid.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting for me to think about the sort of the thin boundary between those emotions. Even though one tends to fall positively and one tends to fall negatively. And I don't know if they're using the same Greek there because I only have the English in front of me, but.
Yeah, so the Greek is traumas kai ekstasis. The first word, traumos is, we get trauma from there. Yeah. So trembling and fear is the usual translation. But then ekstasis, so we get ecstasy from there, right? Yeah. And so the stock translations are amazement, astonishment, bewilderment.
Yeah.
And so I think that supports what you're saying. Like, dread sounds more fearful or negative.
Right, you're like, it sounds so heavy, like you're weighed down with this, like, so unending, like, weighty, I don't know, sadness or fear. It sounds entirely negative.
I like that a lot. So here we have, before we were saying, are these the same people, or are they different people experiencing these things? Here you have it very clearly, like, embodied in these three women are both this experience of fear and also amazement. And the thing is, like, they're experiencing all these, like, the sort of prism of emotions are all like present to them all at once. Yeah,
all the biggest emotions in all the biggest ways. So, I mean, I was thinking a lot about what about this leads them to silence? Like, why don't they tell anyone? And I guess that's why. Like, how do you work through language once that, I don't know, when you're holding all of those feelings?
Yeah, so let's come back to verse 8, because there's a lot, I think, going on there. I just want to make sure we don't miss anything. So what the man in the tomb says is, so I know who you're looking for, first of all. So he's not just sitting in some random tomb. He's actually, like, he knows.
He knows who was in this tomb.
And then he has been raised. So that's the announcement of resurrection in Mark's gospel. That's the whole thing. He has been raised. And then he isn't here. Look, let me show you. I mean, to me, that's just interesting that we don't see resurrected Jesus in this gospel. Jesus doesn't talk to Mary in the garden like he does in John. They don't see him ascend into heaven like they do in Luke. This is the whole thing. He has been raised. He isn't here.
He isn't here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what they see is that they saw Jesus go into that tomb and Jesus is not there anymore.
Yeah. That's exactly right.
But again, it's very easy to read from that, not a miracle, but, well, someone rolled the rock away and took him.
Yeah.
It's not, this is not proof. It's a possibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I do think this announcement, like, there's a lot of trust that one has to place in this random dude in the tomb.
Totally.
Who does not announce himself as an angel. He just says, hey, everybody.
He doesn't identify himself at all.
There is not much confirmation here. I think that's really well said. You either believe this guy who's telling you this thing, who you don't really have any great reason to believe, or you don't. You couldn't blame somebody who kind of did not trust in this sparse of an announcement about the resurrection. So in verse 7, then, this little quick, he's been raised, is followed by an instruction. So go tell his disciples, especially Peter, that he is going ahead of you into Galilee. You will see him there, just as he told you. So first go tell the disciples, and then there's kind of an implied command, which is y'all need to get up from Jerusalem, and you need to make the journey back to Galilee. And when you get there, he'll be there, just like he said he would be. You don't even get, you get like 3 words of the good news. He's resurrected. And then immediately, here's the things you need to do. Any thoughts about that?
I mean, I guess I see it as sort of like you're right. You're not getting like proof here of anything, but is this enough? Is this enough for you to take the next step? And it does take some faith. And the next step is not easy to do, but is this enough that you will take the next step and go to Galilee?
Yeah.
And then you'll get another, it's like a scavenger hunt. And then you'll get another, another confirmation or another sort of piece that will, like the monkey bars of faith. Like, another thing that'll help you sort of swing to the next piece of this.
I like that. So you only get the next thing that you need. I like that a lot. And you don't get any solid proof of any of it. You just have to keep making steps in faith.
Right. To the next thing.
No, I really like where you're headed with that. And, Jesus has predicted 3 times to his inner circle his suffering, death, and resurrection. And so this is not the only instruction that you get, right? Jesus himself, when he was still living, had told them this as well. And so really what the angel or the man in the tomb is not just saying like, hey, trust me, but saying, hey, trust that thing that Jesus told you back in the day really is true. But absolutely, I think where you're headed is right, that like Mark is withholding confirmation and saying the confirmation is that you do the thing, right? You don't it's not that you get the confirmation and therefore you do the thing. It's that you do the thing in the anticipation of the confirmation. And then we never in the gospel get the confirmation. Like we don't actually know whether they encounter Jesus or not when they get to Galilee. We assume that they do, but it's outside the narrative.
Yeah, like you need to move forward. To move forward with faith is to move forward, I guess, as though it's true. Like to, like move forward with that as your sort of North Star. And I guess that's what it takes to sort of get the next piece of it, but not because you have absolute certainty. Yeah. Which is not how a lot of people, including myself, often think of faith. I want certainty.
Yeah, absolutely. So faith is here in this text. The faithful thing is to act on a promise of which you have no real proof.
No proof. Some evidence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about this last verse. They're overcome with terror and dread. It says they fled from the tomb. So they hear this thing and they run away. And then the last line of the gospel, they said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. First, it's probably worth just mentioning that when you read Mark's gospel in most translations, there is a verse 9, and it continues on through verse 20, and most of those will be marked. The CEB that I'm reading, the heading of that section is endings added later. Most scholars think those endings weren't original to the gospel, but they were added by people who thought the ending of the original
we can't
ending
end
of Mark.
It there.
Yeah,
right.
How could you end there?
Right.
And so they were added in. So when we say this is the end of the gospel, like what we mean is this is probably where the gospel originally ended. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. What a strange place to end the gospel.
Yeah, I mean, it really is, because it opens the question, if they really said nothing to anyone, will it never become clear to people that Jesus was resurrected?
Yeah.
You know, they were the only ones, as far as we know, who saw that he had been placed in that tomb and he was no longer there.
Yeah.
And if the disciples don't go down to Galilee, like, it's a very suspenseful sort of ending.
Yeah, it really is.
After all this, will people never know? Yeah,
the whole thing could fall apart right here.
Yeah.
In Greek, the end of that verse is ephobunto gar. So the last word, so gar means for, or something like, so it's not for they were very afraid, it's they were very afraid for. Translationally, it can mean either one, but it's interesting to have a gospel-length work that ends with the word for, right? Like because, ... So it's weird in English, for they were very afraid, but it's even weirder in my mind in Greek, because it ends with a particle that normally is opening up the next thing, but there's nothing. There's nothing there.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's open, you know, like, so there's your fourth one. You talked about the heavens opening and
that's nice.
Curtain opening and the tomb opening, and the gospel opens at the end. It's just open to the world and it doesn't wrap up.
I love that. That was really nice. Connecting it to yes, that's beautiful. So what do you, I mean, it's one thing to say that this is a weird ending to a gospel, and it's a weird ending to a gospel. But one has to imagine that the story is told this way for some kind of reason. Or at the very least, we can interpret this ending in ways that sort of convey meaning. So any thoughts about, like, what's the gospel trying to get the reader to respond? How's the gospel trying to get the reader to respond? Any thoughts about that?
And I'm trying to figure out how to separate in some way this question from my sort of ending wrap up, but maybe they'll just sort of bleed into each other.
Yeah, I think this is probably an appropriate time to say, like, you know, what do you think this gospel is doing for an ancient audience, and therefore, like, as modern readers who are sort of overhearing the gospel, what does it mean for us, or what do we do with it? I think those two questions kind of naturally fold together. So yeah, don't worry about trying to separate them out. Okay.
So given, I will tell you just sort of in an upfront way that given the mess that our world is in at this particular moment, the concept of grace is heavy on my mind. Jews don't talk a whole lot about grace, but it is in our tradition also. And, you know, as I was reading this story, and it was sort of entertaining to me to think, like, well, what would the disciples have done? They'd be having foot races to the tomb and competing and all this stuff. And the women are doing all the good stuff. And the women are doing so much better than the disciples. And then I sort of stopped and was like, you know, assuming that women in general, or the women in this story, are not inherently superior to the men.
Yeah.
What is it about them or their situation that enables them to act differently?
Yeah.
And part of where I came down was this idea that the access to power and, like, the place you have within a system of power and all those eyes on you by the systems of power at play that the disciples may have experienced are like chokeholds. And nobody, as far as I know, and no one ever really asked the women what they thought of Jesus. And so they didn't have to, like, stake a claim and make a statement. They were able to just sort of take the next step, like just do the next right thing.
Yeah.
And so seeing at the end that they also experience fear and can't just do everything, you know, like, they can't just be like, oh yeah, sure, we'll totally do that. This is no big deal. Like, this whole story is really big and scary and powerful and amazing. And the women are not immune to that either.
Yeah.
They just are outside the eyes of power in some ways, or the systems of power. And I don't know, it just has me thinking about, Jesus is teaching over and over again that it's the people without power who will have more access to the kingdom of God. And I always took that sort of as you should be humble kind of thing. But now I see it just sort of as power. Power actually makes it hard to do what's right because you don't have the space. You don't have the space to sit with complex things and act in complex ways and move slowly. Instead you have someone asking you, do you know Jesus? Do you know him? Are you with him? Like, as they're crucifying Jesus. Yeah. Like, that is a lot of pressure. Yeah. That's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
That was a strange answer to the question, but I guess I feel a lot of grace for the women, and and it makes me feel more grace for the disciples too, to see that like this is really big for them, for the women also.
Yeah, I really love that, and here, so I mean, basically, what this angel has said to them is, look, the whole future of this whole thing depends on you.
Right. And they freaked out too.
They freaked out too. Which is very much in keeping with sort of Mark's story in which everyone has abandoned Jesus. Yeah. Including in the Good Friday story that we read in our special episode. God, at least Jesus experiences God as having abandoned him. But the women were there, and now here we have the women, at least for a moment, kind of freaking out about it too. There's so much in that you just said about, relationships to power and grace for the characters. And then I think grace for ourselves too, those of us who feel some kind of calling in whatever way to do something, like to witness to something bigger than ourselves in the world, and how that sometimes freaks us out and causes us to not do the next right thing.
Or to not be able to see what it even is, because someone's not asking us to do the next thing. They're asking us to see 10 steps down the road and declare something about it.
Oh, I see.
And we can't always do that.
Yeah.
Why do you think the gospel ends here, Bobby?
I'm so intrigued by this ending. I mean, honestly, this is my favorite resurrection story in the New Testament. The other ones do have the kind of things you were talking about with the disciples racing to the tomb. And
they do.
The women are always the ones who discover Jesus's body, but then the male disciples always show up in the other gospels and do something or other. And so you get more, in all of the other three, you get more story than this. And Jesus appears to people in all the other three. And so I love this telling of it because in my mind, it's more like this is the experience of faith. Yeah. Is that you have this story and you have this promise and you have some evidence of it, and you're told to go into the world living its truth, but you don't have anything concrete, most of us, about it. Yeah. Like you've never actually encountered the resurrected Jesus in your life, most of us, in the same way that we don't encounter him in the gospel. And so I feel like Mark's gospel in that sense is sort of true to life.
Yeah, I really like that.
The fact that it ends with the word for, I love the way you said it. I mean, I think this is true, but I've never said it quite this way, that it opens up the gospel to the world. And the way that I've thought about that is it opens itself up to the reader. It invites the reader into this question of like, is anybody going to go to Galilee? Because it doesn't seem like maybe the women are going to do it. Yeah. So somebody needs to get up and go.
Somebody needs to go to Galilee.
Yeah, Jesus is there. Like, hey guys, hello.
He's all alone.
Yeah, and so this kind of quirky ending where the women are too afraid to say anything, and then it ends with this kind of for ... It's almost like a choose your own adventure. Like the end of the story has not been written, dear reader, and here you are reading it. And so, are you going to go to Galilee or are you not? And I think that is really lovely. Like, it invites, like, now suddenly we are characters in the story, and the kind of completion of this story requires us to act in faith on something about which we have not very good evidence.
Yeah.
So I love that.
Yeah. I really like that too.
And to me, somehow that seems particularly appropriate in this particular Easter, in which people in North America anyway are mostly not gathering in their churches on Easter. Yeah. We're all kind of in our own places. The evidence for God's action in the world, for the evidence for the resurrected Jesus, is a little sparse right now when you look around. Things seem more like Friday than they do Sunday, to use the kind of Easter framework.
Yeah.
But that's not an excuse in Mark's gospel to freeze up or to not do the next thing, to not go to Galilee. Mark's gospel is about, you have to live toward a promise that you have heard rumors of, but of which you actually have very little concrete evidence. And I think in some ways that's what we're doing right now, is we're being asked to continue pointing toward life and the triumph of life over death, even though in this moment that's not an obvious or easy thing to do. I think this is a really rich text for Easter Sunday. And
this is a really rich text. And I love that. I love the mystery.
Yeah.
I love that.
I do too, yeah. There's something nice about not having it overly precise. And the way that connects to the messiness of reality.
Indeed.
I don't think this text gets preached on Easter very much because it's a little underwhelming. You know what I mean? Like, you'd much rather have Jesus, and Mary weeping in the garden together, like in the Gospel of John.
Yeah.
Like in the Gospel of John, but here you just get this. And so I'm excited that those pastors who listen to us, who are narrative lectionary pastors, are going to have a chance to preach this text.
Yeah. I think it's a really good. I think it's a good moment in history to be looking at this text.
I think so too.
Yeah.
All right, Amy. Well, it's been great talking to you about this text. I hope your Passover this week is a rich and blessed one. What do you say to people what do you hope for people on Passover?
You say Chag Sameach.
Yeah. Happy festival.
Yeah. Pretty much.
Yeah.
Yes, and I hope that you have a beautiful and meaningful Easter as well, and wish all of the folks in our listening community health and love and hope in this season.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Bible Worm. Blessings to all of you in the season of Passover and Easter. We'll see you next time.